There are a lot of Trump voters who are very upset with pulling troops out of Syria. I know them. I know a bunch of them who don't like this at all. They are deeply disappointed over this. There are other Trump voters who think that this is another promise kept to get us out of hellholes in the world where nothing ever changes, nothing ever benefits us, that we expose our best and costliest treasure, blood, material for no apparent aim.
Rush Limbaugh there referring to a perceived split in President Trump's base thanks to his decision to pull U.S. troops from Syria and reportedly at least some of the ones in Afghanistan, too. Rush and others believe the split could pose a serious problem for the president. Historian Walter Russell Mead, writing in the Wall Street Journal, Mr. Trump's decisions on Syria and Afghanistan provide a way for some in the GOP to break with the president without losing their own populist credentials. The New York Times sees the Syria decision uniting left and right against him. Sensing opportunity, Washington Post writer opines it is time for Senate Republicans to seriously consider removing Trump in the event the House moves to impeach. Trump is a menace to our democracy and national security. So is the split between America First base and the hawkish conservatives a threat to the president? Let's discuss with tonight's Power Panel. David McIntosh, President, Club for Growth. Daniel Hoffman, former CIA station chief. Christian Whitten, a former senior advisor in the Trump and Bush administrations. Gentlemen, welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I want to play a little bit of what the president had to say when he was visiting troops in Iraq just yesterday.
I think I'm probably more hawkish than anybody. Nobody's more hawkish than me. But I also like to use it in the right place. And frankly, I like not using it at all.
Christian, what do you make of that characterization of what his personal position is?
I think that's absolutely right. He is hawkish when there's a direct threat to the United States or a threat to, frankly, world order, if you forgive the phrase, because if you look when Bashar Assad threatened to use chemical weapons, did use chemical weapons, Trump acted decisively and struck. Also, he acted very decisively in killing ISIS and deploying forces to Syria and accomplish that mission. But we have to have some economy. We can't be everything to everyone. And if you add Syria and Afghanistan, that's a $60 billion a year commitment. That money could be spent deterring the Chinese, deterring Russia. Instead, we're wasting it on cowboys and Indians in the Middle East.
Well, Daniel, you and I have discussed this. There are a lot of people who think us pulling a presence out from there actually is a threat to our national security, and that there are plenty of people worried about the Kurds, worried about Iran and Russia's influence in that sphere if we pull out. What's your assessment?
Yeah, I spent 3 years of my life deployed in combat zones trying to collect intelligence on threats from transnational terrorists and others, and stopping those threats before they're visited on our shores. And while I don't think we have the wherewithal, the resources to nation build, as the president rightly says, the question is, what's the right commitment? Is it 2,000 troops in Syria to collect intelligence and stop those threats by leveraging allies like the Syrian Democratic Forces to fight ISIS? I think what I'd like to see, maybe this is a developing story, and the president will use his bully pulpit to explain his policy to the American people now that he's back from Iraq.
Yeah, there's been some call for that he would give a national address explaining a little bit more about what he sees short and long term there, and clarifying policy, which a lot of people think we haven't had a clear policy in Syria for years. I want to read a little bit more of that Walter Russell Mead piece that was in the Wall Street Journal. He says, for the first time, Mr. Trump made a foreign policy decision that divides the coalition that brought him into the White House and risks his control of the GOP. Mr. Trump has frequently challenged and infuriated his political opponents, but his Syria decision risks alienating allies he can ill afford to lose. Here's Rush Limbaugh reacting to that piece.
This old global liberal order is rearing its head here. Everybody thinks that Trump is following through on a campaign promise. Get out of Syria, get out of all these entanglements, which to a certain faction of his base he is. But the point in this column is there's others in his base that don't like this at all.
All right, David, where is he with the base?
Yeah, Shannon, and at the club, we don't take a position on the policy, so I'll defer to Christian and Daniel on that. But on the politics, I think the president will have his base with him. In part, there hasn't been a moral case made for why we're in Syria. Daniel makes a very good argument that we're fighting ISIS, and people will support that. But I think 80–90% of the Republican voters want the president to succeed, and they want Republicans in Washington to support him. And so when he makes the decision, time to leave Syria, they're going to be inclined to support him. So I don't see this big divide. There is a part of the base that wants us to be strong militarily. That's correctly described in the Wall Street Journal. But they're more concerned about taking on China and Russia if they're aggressive in Europe. So I think the president will be fine politically on this. What he is disturbed is kind of the Washington elite. And he's never really been comfortable with them, and they're not comfortable with him.
That's for sure. On both counts. Christian, I think it was a piece you had written this week that was very interesting, talking about the president sees the value in using our economic strengths and leveraging those kinds of things on trade and those kinds of policies just as much as using our military. And that, I think one of your lines was banks versus bombs. I mean, he sees the way to use them both and not just solely focus on military incursions.
Yeah, I think the president looks at statecraft more on a spectrum. It's not just economics is one thing and war is another, or the military is another. So when it comes to setting back China, it's not just a bigger military budget, which the president has achieved, $717 billion in this fiscal year, although that might be a high watermark with Nancy Pelosi coming in on the House. But other issues like trade and using that to get better deals from not just our adversaries, but also our allies, many of whom have been taking advantage of it. But overall, I think the public is very much, it's important to remember, the public is very much on the president's side. There's not good polling on Syria, perhaps because it would show that people support Trump. But on Afghanistan, the polling is clear. If you ask people, should we go up or down in forces, 2-to-1, they say we should go down. Only 20 to 25% think we're winning in Afghanistan, and only 20% or less of Americans think that we have a clear strategy in Afghanistan. So when it comes to pulling back ground forces and going back to, frankly, Ronald Reagan's strategy, relying on a Navy, relying on an Air Force to project power in the Middle East and beyond, there's a lot of support for that. I agree the president ought to actually articulate that a little clearer.
Well, Daniel, do you think the president is persuadable on either of these fronts, Syria or Afghanistan, because a number of his good friends and allies like Senator Lindsey Graham, who just got back from Afghanistan days ago, say they're not going to let this go, that they feel that there needs to be a tougher conversation with the president, trying to persuade him, which I think they're actively trying to do at this point.
Yeah, I mean, the president swiveled in a different direction back in August of 2017 when he made that speech about Afghanistan and decided to commit our troops, even though that was counter to what he said during the campaign. I will say that the fight against the terrorists in South Asia and in the Middle East, I can say from my experience, it's really human-based. It's our JSOC guys and intelligence, and it's hard to do it just from the air. We need actually people there with skills. And to some extent, the secret of our success is the secret of our success. Folks back home aren't tracking on all the al-Qaeda guys we're killing who would threaten our homeland, and that's a good thing. But at the same time, I think the public is maybe blissfully unaware, and maybe they need to be more aware now of the steps we've taken.
We do have a poll that we found from over the summer, very interesting, about the support for troops in Iraq and Syria being used to combat Islamic extremists. And I think we put that overall, but you could see the Republicans there, 69%, at least when this survey was done over the summer, said that they were in favor of having our troops there, David. So it looks like, from this survey just months ago, they saw the benefit of keeping them there.
Oh, I think they did. My point really is they trust the president, and if he says we don't need them anymore, I think you'd see 69% saying, okay, take them,
so you
bring
think it's
them back
more
home.
about their aligning with what they think he wants to do?
I do think that's key with the Republican base. And then that leads into your other question about impeachment. I think the fact the Washington Post is giving advice to Republicans that they should impeach a Republican president is laughable in some ways, as Christian demonstrates. And that's what we saw today. Republicans in the Senate are going to stand by the president because the base of Republican voters will.
Yeah, and what we've seen is also Maggie Haberman from the New York Times was on saying, essentially, all we need is 20 GOP senators to convince them, and this may be the time. The president's been in trouble before. He's been able to pull back from the precipice. But could this be the time? Anyone think that there will be a GOP move to get on board? Should the House impeach him, which isn't unfathomable? The Senate getting rid of him, different story.
Well, look at, Maggie Haberman is supposedly a journalist, and here she is trying to, run a political campaign to get people to impeach Donald Trump, who hasn't actually committed a crime or even been accused coherently of a crime or convicted by the House of Representatives. Really is the fake media on overdrive. It's fairly stunning.
Daniel?
I'll wade into that political discussion. President Obama was arguably guilty of a far greater dereliction of duty when he withdrew our troops from Iraq, and that enabled the growth of ISIS in Iraq. And then by not interfering or not intervening in Syria, created the conditions there for ISIS to grow as well. I don't understand how you can be speaking this way about President Trump and not look back at recent history as well. It just doesn't seem as if it's a very productive discussion.
10 seconds, David, and then we got to go.
Yeah, I think the Democrats are making a big mistake driving for impeachment. We did it in the 90s with Bill Clinton. It backfired on Republicans. What Americans want is a return to business. And if there's more chaos with impeachment, they're going to turn on the Democrats and say, you didn't do what we sent you there for.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much. Great discussion tonight. Come back soon. All right.